My name is Michelle Silverman-Bedell from Silverson's Realty, and I've invited Tom Camella, who is a wonderful home inspector, to speak about home inspections, and he will explain what he does, his licensing, etc.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
So Tom, tell me about what does it take to become a home inspector?
Well, a lot of studying, a lot of training. I started off almost 40 years ago now.
Oh wow,
So
a long time.
I was lucky to get involved with one of the original home inspectors that founded ASHI. So I worked with him for several years, and then he sold the company, and I moved on to another company.
Okay, great.
But we had, there's a lot of testing, and then now there's state licensing. When I started off, there was no licensing. It was just, anybody could do home inspection.
Right.
But I had, a lot of training, and the guy I worked for was a stickler, very detailed. So I
Right.
had a lot of in-depth training with a lot of seminars.
It was
a lot of
continuous
workshops.
training,
It's
right?
continuous training every year.
Okay.
So now we have to do it for every state, every little thing needs certain hours. Just like the real estate, we need certain hours. of
Right,
training.
exactly. And when you first meet with you start the inspection, where do you usually start? What are the issues you look for in a home inspection?
I like to start around the outside of the building.
Okay.
So I usually meet the client, and I start right off the bat. I tell them I'm going to give a lot of details.
Right.
Not trying to scare them, but
Right,
I want them
right.
to know what they're getting involved with. So and they understand that. Most clients are very appreciative.
Pretty
They
savvy,
want to know all
yeah.
the details about the house. So
Right,
that's
right.
what I do. And I had to take a couple of laps around the outside of the house. This way we can see what things look like. Look at the roof, the gutters, the grading, whatever is on the outside.
Right.
And then I go inside that building.
Okay. And where do you start typically?
And my technique, I like to go down to the basement with the
Basement.
mechanicals. To me,
Okay.
that's the fun part. The older the basement, the spookier, the scarier, the
Right,
weirder.
right.
Then that's the part that I like. I tell people that's the nitty gritty part of the house. The rest of it is more or less decorations.
Right.
I check the plumbing and the windows
Right,
and everything
right,
like that,
right.
and everything. But the fun stuff is down in the basement.
Okay, so it's the guts of the house,
The guts
basically,
of
right?
the house. I like to look down there and also just make sure things are in suitable condition to do the rest of the inspection. If there's some
Right.
an issue with the boiler or
Right.
some kind of thing, I don't want to turn on the heat and then go down to the basement at the end and find the basement full of smoke because the boiler wasn't set up properly.
Right,
So I
right.
have to go down there, and then I have to go up to the attic and work back down from the top and finish up in the kitchen.
And the attic is also important, right?
Yeah,
Looking
yeah.
at the
Well, that's what I
end
do.
of
I go from the basement
Roof.
up to the attic, and then I work from the attic all the way back down. This way, I can run the plumbing fixtures and then check for leaks down below. So I run water in the bathroom upstairs, and then when I go down to the first floor, I'll know if there's a leak. Versus if I went the other way, you might not notice.
Okay, and what about crawl spaces? Like a lot of these older homes, part of the house is on the crawl space.
Yeah, that's where I give the realtor my flashlight and let the realtor.
Not me.
No, crawl spaces if I get into the crawl
I stay away.
If I can get into the crawl space, I get into the crawl space. Some are accessible, some are not. Some I just have to peek through the opening and see as much as I can see. But if it's a reasonable size opening, I'll crawl through. I don't mind getting dirty.
Right, that I know. And also, in terms of an attic, not all the attics are open spaces. It can also be like a small crawl space or push-up attic.
Correct. So there's often stairs. Sometimes there's just a hatch. And again, I have a ladder, so I try to get in through the hatch if I can, and walk around in the attic or crawl around in the attic sometimes, and see what I can see.
Okay.
Other times, the attic is a foot high and you can't see anything, so you just have to kind of poke your head in there and look around. But I can still check for insulation or any major sagging beams or anything
Whatever you can see.
Yeah.
Right. Do you, when you look at a roof, do you sometimes take a drone or do you go?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, if it's a low, like a ranch house or a flat roof, and I can get there from the ground safely, I might climb on top of the roof and walk around the roof. Other times, I use binoculars to see the high roofs. Now we have the drone, so if it's not accessible, or sometimes there's areas I want to get a closer look at, I'll send the drone up there and take a look around, look at the chimney, look at the flashing and everything. And sometimes there's just there's hidden areas that you get surprised when you run the drone up there, you can see it.
What I think when you're doing an inspection, especially for her first-time home buyer, what are the scary issues for the buyer, but that are really not that significant? Where they really focus on, but they're more scary, but they're not really very significant issues.
Right. Well, everybody worries about termites, worries about cracks in the foundation, things like that. Most foundations have cracks, and usually it's not a big issue. And a lot of houses have termites, and unless they've done a lot of damage, it's a simple treatment.
Right, right.
They worry with that. And I find a lot of people worry about gutters. They ask me, how are the gutters? And that's really, it's an important part of the house, but it's a simple fix, and it's one of the, they need to be maintained and cleaned, of course, but it's not a big expense.
No, you could do that twice a year, right?
Right. They kind of get a little over concerned with the gutter sometimes.
Right. But when you're looking at a house, what are really truly the red flags that you would be most concerned about when you're walking through a home for a home inspection?
Probably water intrusion may be the biggest,
right?
The biggest issue, because water does a lot of damage. You want to keep the water out. You don't want it into the basement. You don't want it coming through the roof. You don't want it coming through the walls or the windows or anything like that. And it causes potentially structural damage, fungal growth, and things like that.
Right, and mold. I think people are very concerned about mold, environmental issues today.
Correct.
Right. So if the people ask you for, let's say, advice on how to, if they see water in the basement, do they ask you for the costs of remediation, or how do you go about getting rid of or dealing with the water in the basement? Everybody, I can tell you, no matter where the house is, they want to know if the house has had any water in it.
Right.
Standing water, flooding, etc.
Right. So most houses have had some degree of water.
Right.
So it's a very, very common thing. Sometimes there's signs of flooding, and then you want to know what caused the flood and how often it has occurred. We've had a couple of bad storms. We had Ida, we had Hurricane Sandy, and a lot of people just had a one-time flood, and that was it. But there's still evidence of it, so that may be,
unless they took care of it.
Maybe a little bit of a less of a concern, because
right.
One or two time thing, but other times you see the signs of water that's been there for you can tell it's kind of chronic water coming in.
More chronic
for a long time.
Right. So you would be concerned. I remember selling a house right adjacent to a river, and it was amazing. It was, the whole place had been flooded, and it sold. You just never know when it was bought by a builder.
I've seen houses literally built on top of streams, and water comes in. In the old days, that was expected.
Right.
People had water in the basement. Now we want everything nice and dry, and have a family room and a playroom and everything down there.
Right.
In the old days, you got a little water in the basement. That was typical.
Right. I think it's very different today. I think the average buyer today is very concerned about environmental issues. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at a home, what other environmental issues do you pick up besides, let's say, water in the basement, mold? What else do you
mold, asbestos. People concerned with mold, with asbestos, oil tanks, underground oil tanks. These days, most of the underground oil tanks, I think, have been properly dealt with, but not always. So sometimes you see signs of an old oil tank, or sometimes two oil tanks, one removed, and there's a second one,
and nobody knew about it. Right.
Correct. So probably mold, asbestos, radon also is a concern. So radon, we do testing. Most houses do radon testing, and that's the second cause of cancer under cigarettes. So cigarettes is number one, and radon is number two. There are 21,000 deaths a year, so it's
is that so?
It's
wow.
important to test for radon. So that's an important test.
But it's done typically up here in Westchester. But do you also, let's say, I know when my son bought his home out in Long Island, because it's built on sand, right?
Long Island, they typically don't do it.
They don't do it.
Not an issue, right?
Right. So because I was his mother and also neurotic, I made him do a radon test, and I think that you never know, with a lot of granite around in that house, one could have radon. Who knows?
Actually, somebody found radon in an apartment building because there was radon material in the concrete, radioactive material in the concrete. It was like on the 32nd floor of a high-rise building.
Oh my God!
So you just never know.
You never know, right? And radon's easily treatable, right?
It's a very simple system most times. Yeah.
I don't know how you would do it in an apartment building.
In the apartment building, I don't know what they did.
You have to go down also into the basement and vent out the whole building. I guess.
Right.
I'm not quite sure how it's done effectively.
They probably came up with a system of ventilation is the biggest cure for it.
That's true. So besides that, so you have radon, asbestos, easily remediated, right? You could easily remediate, test for it afterwards. What are any other? Oil tanks. What happens if they said it's been removed? What clues in the basement? You're a good detective. Would you look for to see if there were any old lines or anything in the
Well,
basement.
that's exactly it. Sometimes I see old lines, sometimes right through the foundation, you can see two little copper lines going right through the wall. That's where the oil tank was.
Right,
Sometimes you see the lines on the floor by the boiler. Other times out you see a shadow where the oil tank, where the vent pipe was on the outside wall. Especially if there's some stucco on the foundation, you can see where the vent was. And now, if there's just a shadow, that it probably indicates that it was removed. But
you never know.
You never know. And I've just seen some,
Then you would,
some
what would you
weird
do?
situations.
What would you recommend at that point?
Then they do a tank sweep.
A
So
tank.
somebody comes with a metal detector and they check the underground area for any signs. It's not 100%.
Like a scan.
Sometimes it could be a big boulder or something, but they kind of they have it down pretty well so they can see the outline of an oil tank. And
Right.
then if there's a tank there and there's no records of abandonment or removal, then they have to have it pulled out.
Right, they have to do it. I remember having a sweep of the ground because nobody could figure out if there was a tank. They said it was removed. There was no evidence in the town or the municipality. It turned out to be part of a car. It
Wow.
wasn't a tank.
Mhm.
But you never know. You really have to
You
check
don't
it
know,
to
right.
make sure.
Right. Well, part of a car is not so good either.
Right, so it's kind of interesting. Nobody was too happy about it.
Yeah.
Well, the buyer was happy there was no tank. The seller was not happy that everything was, his whole lawn had to be put back together.
Right.
If the seller is getting a house ready for sale, what would you recommend the seller to do to prepare for the inspection?
Well, they should do an inspection because even
A pre-inspection.
a pre-sale inspection, because even with the best intentions, there are things that the average homeowner or seller does not know about. That's going to come up in the inspection. So even if they don't necessarily fix everything, it's just good to know. What it is. Some people say, "Oh yeah, the roof is new. It's only 20 years old." Well, guess what? That's not a new roof,
Right.
Or they paid a lot of money to have their heating system serviced, and there's still problems with it.
Right.
So it's just good to go in with open eyes, and don't be surprised if some things pop up that they weren't aware of.
Right.
So I'm
And
doing more and more of the pre-sale
pre-inspection.
Yes.
And also, I think the seller then not only will know about the issues, but can repair it in anticipation of a buyer coming in with their own inspector, right?
Correct.
And doing that, so you can kind of fix the house and prep it for sale the correct way.
Correct, and I try to give them a little guidance, some things that I think are important, and other things I said, talk to your real estate agent because certain things you may not want to renovate the kitchen, and the next person comes in and they don't like what you did, they're going to rip it out anyway. So don't waste money fixing things that don't necessarily need to be fixed. But if there's a leak in the roof or the bathroom or something like that, you do want to fix that.
That you do because it can cause further problems
Right.
down the
Exactly.
road, like mold or whatever.
And clean up the mouse traps.
And clean up.
Yes. Most houses have mice, but the last thing a buyer wants to see is mouse traps all over the place.
Or droppings all over
Right,
the place.
exactly.
People get very upset and
They
skittish
get
about that.
upset about that, but in reality, you're gonna have mice.
Right.
Don't show it off.
Right. Clean up the mouse, the dead mouse that's lying in the basement. You just never know. Or in the attic, people
Yeah.
forget that they can crawl all over and come in, especially I think in the fall when it starts
And in
getting
the fall,
cold.
exactly.
Right, and it's seasonal. So I think that a home inspector plays a great part. A home inspection plays a great part during the buying and selling process. And are there any other tips you can give us, even as a realtor, that we should be concerned about going in and make sure that we advise our clients correctly?
I mean, as far as buying or selling?
Either one.
Either one. Well, the sellers again, keep things clean. I mean, the real key to a house is maintenance.
Right.
So you don't want to show there's a lot of deferred maintenance when you're selling a house. So some people will go in and they'll renovate the house, and then for 20 years they don't touch anything.
Right.
So
right.
you kind of want to spruce it up and put on your best face when you're selling the house. And for the buyers, the same thing. Realize that there are going to be some issues with the house. I mean,
Right.
there are no perfect houses, and even if it was perfect on the day we did the inspection, guess what? Next week, next month, next year, something is going to break. I mean, houses are constantly in flux, and there's always repairs to be done. So really want to make sure things are well maintained.
Right. I think also another point, a lot of buyers ask me if you will come back prior to the closing. We have the New York allows the buyer to do a final walkthrough right before the closing. And often the clients will ask Tom to do that. Do you recommend that? Do
Yeah.
you
It-
see that often?
It depends how the clients feel about things, okay? I don't know if I should say it, but, a lot of times when things are supposed to be repaired, they're not always repaired, in the best fashion.
Right,
So,
right.
when you're selling a house, you don't want to spend extra money to do more repair than necessary. So it's often better for the buyers to do the repair, if they
Right.
have some kind of allowance. But again, I don't get involved with negotiations.
No, but it's, you make a good point, like often on the inspection, certain issues will come up, and in your report, you highlight the most significant ones first, am I
Correct.
correct? So, the sellers may repair it, but if a final inspection, if you're called in, you could make sure that those repairs were done correctly.
Correct, right.
Or
right.
even done,
Or
so.
even done, sometimes they're not done.
Right, but they say they are.
Right. Well, sometimes the sellers think they're done, but the contractor did not do necessarily the best job.
Right, so.
I said, well, I gotta charge you $1,000 for it, or I gotta do the $200 job. Which do you want? What do you? You're selling the house, you're gonna take the $200 job.
Right, so I think it's good to have a final inspection, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
If I was buying a house now, I would want my inspector, Tom, to come in and to kind of check to make sure, right before the closing, that everything was done, that they had to do correctly, that the seller had to do, per the contract correctly, I think that's important.
Especially if they're a first-time buyer.
Yes.
They're not that familiar with things.
Right.
If they're a seasoned buyer, it's their fourth or fifth house, then they're probably comfortable with just going in.
One other point, the buyers will often ask me, do I have to be at the inspection? And I tell them absolutely. If you're in the area, if you're in the state or the country, you should absolutely be at the inspection, because you need to know how to work the house.
It's much better to see it firsthand. I can show them where the main water valves are, how to work the heating systems, maintenance items, and also point out things that are good to fix, but are less of a concern. So when they read the report, they don't. I list a lot of little things, and a lot of them are not critical, but it's good to know. I always say, the sidewalk has an uneven section. Not a big deal in the scope of a house, but if you trip and hit your head into something, then you're gonna wish you fixed that uneven section. So a lot of things are minor and they're good to fix, but you have to take them in context. So I try to do that during the inspection, and then we can always wrap up any questions that they have when they're going into the house. I try to answer the questions for them, and then at the end we do kind of a summary and say, all right, these are the three main things that really should be taken care of, and there's a lot of little things that would be nice to do. In reality, the main thing is that I want my buyers, my clients, to know what they're getting into. Doesn't mean they have to fix everything.
Right.
I can come back 5 years later and they may not have touched a thing.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine if they don't want to. But at least they should know what they're getting into beforehand. Then they can decide, do they want to fix it or do they not want to fix
Right.
it. That's up to them.
So in summary, a house inspection is, I think, a critical part of the buying process, and buyers should take it seriously, but not be over concerned about very minimal issues, but really understand the major points of an inspection, and also to know that they can call Tom especially if they have any questions after they read the report. And by the way, Tom turns around the report usually within 24 hours.
Yeah,
correct?
I try to get that same day. Usually
Or even the same day.
Same night, most 90% of the time, that same night.
Which I think in a very heated market is very important in the buying process. You don't want to wait 3 days for the inspection to come back. You may wait 2 days or 3 days for the radon, but the attorneys know how to handle that issue in the contract. But the general issue, any issues that come up on an inspection, a buyer will typically know, usually within 24 hours of the same day.
They'll know at the end of the inspection.
Right.
Assuming they come to the inspection, I'm going to point out everything as we go through, and and they'll know what's going on.
Okay, well, I really thank you, Tom.
Oh, thank you.
I know Tom many years,
Yep.
and he's a great inspector, and he's very approachable and easy to work with, and always accessible to us, even if we have questions. Even as a realtor, on another inspection that was done maybe by another inspector, he's always available for questions.
Yeah. Text me Sunday night, and I'll see you from Monday morning.
All right, so we want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and have a great day.